Welcome to Voices in Vet with Alan's Training. I'm Ferne Robinson, General Manager Regulatory Compliance, and it's my pleasure to be your host today. I'd like to introduce my guest speaker, a man who needs no introduction, the famous Marc Ratcliffe, or Mr. WED, aka certainly a well-known figure in the industry, the vet sector, and long-term and high-profile member, I may say. Very proactive in the industry. Welcome, Marc.
Thanks, Fern. It's my great pleasure to be here. Listen, the hype woman in this particular case, I do appreciate it. So it's been a while, but still enjoy what we do, which is the important part.
Yeah, excellent. We see you in and out of VEL conferences, webinars. So certainly I think a lot of our podcast listeners today will have had some exposure to you in some context over the last few years. So Marc, tell me a little bit about your background and how you entered the sector and what you're currently doing.
Yeah, listen, if you've got some time, certainly it's an interesting story. I started out life as after school in a TAFE environment as a student. And we were doing business studies at the time, and during the business studies, we'd give presentations and that kind of thing. And one of my lecturers said, "You should really think about doing this as a job because you're very good." And I go, "Oh wow, that's pretty nice feedback from the lecturer and all the rest." And so I pivoted and I finished my business and went and did a school teaching qualification, so a 4-year qualification, and then I went and did some school teaching, and didn't love it as much as I do adult learning. As much as I think nowadays I would enjoy being back in a school environment, I think I was just too young, to be honest. You're coming out, you're not that much older than the kids. But I do get to support school teachers now through PD and things like the assessor skill set. So I do get to spend quite a bit of time in schools now and get to see the alternate life I could have had. So that's where it started. So I wasn't really looking to be in education, but I got some positive feedback and then ran with that and continued to grow and take the opportunities as they presented themselves. So these days, we're an RTO, and 26 years we've been doing TAE and the similar type things from that. We just love that space. When we started, it was like have trainers will travel, and I'm still traveling. As you know, I live overseas, and I come back to Australia about 3.5 months of the year, and it does allow me to have a base where I can go and do a whole range of side training things and consulting and whatnot, which is great. But love that training space and continue to feed that and support that and be advocates for it.
Yeah, I know you're very busy and you do share your time here and overseas. And it's interesting and it's pleasing to say that Alan's Training and Mr. WED or Marc, yourself, we've had a long-term relationship, 25 years plus.
Yeah.
I think you originally delivered Cert 4 training and assessment back in the day to us. So
it might have been as far back as the BSZ.
I think it was. That's where I started. So BSZ. And it certainly has changed. So in that space, as Mr. WED and being the founder of Mr. WED and certainly one of the most trusted TAE providers, what's your thoughts on the current 40122 and the way that training and assessment's going?
It's an interesting question, and I guess what we've seen over time, Fern, is an evolution of this qualification, or at least a qualification that's that minimum requirement for trainers and assessors, that credential, if you like. And what we've seen over the years is a strengthening and then a weakening, and then a strengthening, then a weakening based on feedback. And it's been a push and pull type situation. We're at the stage now where it's had the most feedback of any other qualification that's currently available. A lot of consultation, a lot of folks involved, and I was involved with the reference committees and whatnot in terms of putting it together too. A lot of people had eyes on this. In the end, I think too many cooks in the kitchen, if I'm completely honest, and it tries to do everything for everybody, and I think that's the biggest criticism that currently is. Having said that, I still think it's a wonderful qualification and offers great opportunities for people who want to pivot into a different career. We see a lot of our students who are on the tools or in an environment which is really hard on the body, but have got a lot to offer. And they see this as a way through to be able to continue in their industry, bringing apprentices in, bringing other qualified people into the space so that they've got that legacy moving forward. So I love seeing that and helping people to use their existing skills and then turn that into a different career, either midlife or later than life. I would like to see some subtle changes to it. I expect there to be some changes the next time round. But currently, for those who don't know, we still don't have a Jobs and Skills Council looking after it.
No.
So we don't have the the things happening behind the scenes in a robust way. Of course, the doer, is looking after it until we can find, is the caretaker for it until we can find somebody else. But at this stage, they've got other stuff on, so it's not top of their list. And ultimately, until we can get somebody in that seat or a collective of JSCs being part of a new development, we're not going to see any of those changes. But I expect to see some changes the next time around.
Well, that's encouraging because just from my observation, and they've long been talking about it, is fit for purpose. Creating a qualification that is fit for purpose. So, trainers don't have to undertake unnecessary units that doesn't fit their job profile generally, or being able to, shift them in and out so that it becomes fit for purpose in how they're delivering or they're assessing. Yeah, that is an interesting point.
Certainly, sorry to interrupt, Fern. I think that what we've seen this time around is that idea of a stackable skill set.
Yes.
And the credential requirements have certainly, continued to focus on those types of things as well. So there is the provision there for people to have a credential that meets the requirements for their job. Although I think a lot of folks, they still like the idea of a full qualification.
Yeah.
Rather than a skill set. And there's a bit of learning for the industry there to understand, well, this is still something that's very powerful and meaningful and allows you to do your job. And then you maintain your regular professional development just like anything else. So I think there's the provision there. It's just a matter of trying to find, I guess, the education piece to let people know, hey, this is the way through for you, and that's perfectly appropriate.
Yeah, excellent. It's very encouraging. And what I've noticed too is there's a reluctance for young people to be coming into the sector. And, you talked about people, being on the tools or being experts in their field and then coming off the tools and going into education, which we absolutely need. But, their desire to take on a qualification late in life, sometimes is difficult. But young people, how do you think we can attract young people into the industry?
And I know that's a challenge we've talked about before,
Yeah.
before the podcast, that we've got those experienced folks that at one stage will want to retire
Yeah.
and go off and do all those things they'd like to do post work. So you're absolutely right. There's a challenge in bringing people, particularly in sectors such as health. But there's a whole range of them, and interesting data stuff. I know I'm going sideways for a second there, but when we look at the data in our organisation, people who are choosing to do our qualification, the average age is over 50. So we know that is the demographic and the cohort that are looking to do that. I guess when it comes to the question you're asking there, how do we get younger folks involved in our sector? Like any other way of being an advocate or an ambassador, we need to get out where the people are and show them that as a solution. And I don't think people are necessarily seeing a vet, teacher or trainer or assessor role when you at school. You're not necessarily saying, hey, that's where I want to see myself in the future. You see school teaching, you might see a higher ed pathway. You don't always see a vet pathway as an instructor. In many cases, because you need to have something behind you, like a vocational competency to be taken seriously and to get those jobs. But I think, say in a health situation there, it's about going to where those young people are. So whether it be while they're doing their undergraduate qualifications and saying, hey, this is a future thing. You might as well do this while you're studying now, get your cert for or get your other qualifications that you need. And then you've got an option whether you do it part-time or whether you do some assessing, whether you do some subject matter expert stuff, they can start to build that as a pathway. So I think it's a promotion job. It's a marketing job that we're doing, and we're getting them at the wrong time. We tend to market them later rather than where they are at that time and get them thinking about that.
Yeah, start thinking about where they would like to go.
Yeah, it's a career path type situation.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'd like to talk to you about Mr. WED. You've sort of become this advocate and certainly the philosophy around edutainment. and you certainly, we've done a lot of webinars and had many discussions on that. For those hearing the term first time, what does that really mean, and how does that tap into things that they need to think about moving forward?
Sure. Edutainment in its simplest form is the combination of education and entertainment,
Yeah,
bringing those together. I think as audiences progress, they have a greater need to be engaged. We can't just say, "Hey, just because I said so, go and do it." They need to be motivated. We need to create an environment that we build not only motivation, but helping them to stay motivated once they leave the class. So those types of things are super important. And I find that idea of that melding together or molding together of education, entertainment is what keeps people involved. It keeps people thinking, keeps people active, keeps people present. If we're just downloading content, that's entirely forgettable.
yeah,
And for me, what adds the extra element of that is fun. I've always been learning should be fun. Even when I was school teaching, kids would ask you, why we're doing this, sir? Because learning is fun,
yeah,
and it should be fun. And I think if the training is fun, the learning is almost effortless. Too much training these days is effortful. So it's too hard, and people are not getting what they need out of it. And we are competing for the attention of our audience more than any other time in human history. There's so many other things happening, not only in our lives, but also, so many bells and buzzers and notifications and so forth. So we need to tap those into those things, almost distractions to the learning rather than distractions from the learning.
yeah.
And we use those elements to kind of keep people going. Now, you can go over the top. Like, I'm not saying every single moment of your message needs to be gamified or it needs to have, the bells and whistles and the dancing boys and dancing girls
Yeah.
going for it. That's not what we're saying. But there is a certain amount of, if we don't have their attention, it doesn't matter how good our content is because it's lost. So we need to do things that kind of grab that attention, hold that attention, and then we've got the best chance of getting our messages across.
Yeah, I agree. And I think trainers, when they're in front of a class, they're performing. You're always putting on that smile. You're always elevating your mood levels to match your audience
For sure.
because you really want to make an impact. And so your role is pivotal to the learner. And learners now, we probably in this time in history as well, the modern learner is far different to the learner that we saw even 5, 10,
Yeah, I
20
would
years
agree.
ago. And their expectations coming into a course has certainly changed. And we see that with student feedback and how they really rise to the occasion and give great praise to trainers that hold their attention, provide those relevant, engaging stories or content, and they really enjoy that.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's the biggest takeaway from this conversation is that we need to be our authentic selves.
Yeah.
We can still tap into a range of technology and other techniques, but people are connecting with humans in the classroom and they want to hear those stories. They want to be blown away by some of those experiences that people have had so they can say, oh, I get a picture, I get the context for what this industry is. We get those war stories. I mean, talking about things like first aid, one of my favorite first aid sessions that I did as a participant was we had the instructor had a range of happy snaps and pictures of difficult situations, which straight away was confronting, but it reminded us this is what we might find. And one of the important lessons, and I'm paraphrasing what he said, was that something along the lines of as a first aider, people aren't going to conveniently fall on their back ready to have first aid placed upon them in an air-conditioned office room. It's going to be on the side of the highway. It's going to be in the car park. It's going to be, when lines have come down in the bush or whatever the case might be. So when you see those situations, you go that's actually really very powerful. What would I do if that was me?
Yeah.
And that was really those stories made it real. As opposed to simply just going through the motions. It really became an authentic situation. And this is an old paramedic, shouldn't say that old, probably my age as he was at the time. But those stories really helped to enliven and uplift the session. I still remember those things.
And it links the learning with the importance of the outcome, doesn't
Absolutely.
it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So technology, talked about technology before. That certainly has changed the way we consume technology, we use technology. How do you think that has changed the modern learning environment and, potentially, the learner's perception and experience.
Yeah, what's interesting is that the classroom these days is much the same as it was 400 years ago. Like we just use new technology to do much the same thing. We've got people around tables and chairs. You've got a guru at the front. You've got a static audience, which is very common. We might have moved from chalkboards to whiteboards to overhead projectors to data projectors to smart boards, but it's that andragogy is much the same as it's always been. So I guess the thing I'll say at this stage is that you still need to have good quality content and there's magic and interaction. If we don't have those two things going, it doesn't matter what technology you've got. It's not going to cut through. I do think on that technology side that our learners are much more discerning. So, if I was to turn up with an overhead projector, the audience would not be happy with that. They might go, what is that? How is that light happening? If you had a few of the younger learners who don't know what that is.
Yeah.
But straight away, there's an expectation that you're using technology in the ebb and flow of your session, and that will only continue to rise. I think there's an expectation that Wi-Fi is available for our learners all the time. That wasn't true 5 years ago, 10 years ago, certainly. So those types of things become the standard, and we need to understand what those expectations are, because that's what people need to engage with our content. Yeah. And then we can start to pivot into those things. Like, people on the line here today might use things like Kahoot and Quizalize and these types of Mentimeter is my favorite one there, where they can use their own devices to interact. And we don't even have to teach them how to use them because they already use them. That's their stuff. So I think there's a way for us to be clever with that without necessarily having to invest a lot of time and money into infrastructure, because our learners already come with some of this stuff. And then for those that don't, we can have a couple of extra tablets and whatnot in the background so they can actively participate as well.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. So for trainers that want to break free from that just traditional deliver content, do the assessment, and want to really engage with their learners, what are some just few simple tips that they can actually start using these things and making it more fun?
Yeah, it's an interesting question again. I mean, I've seen these questions before we start, but every time you ask them, it's like, oh, wow, actually, that's a fantastic question. And I wanted to give a couple of layered responses to this one. So the first thing I think is super important for us to remember is we've got living, breathing humans on the other side of the counter. And if we think about them as numbers, or we think about them as dollar signs, or whatever the case might be, then we're already behind the 8 ball there. So with that in mind, we need to think about, well, what do our learners need? And each group is going to be different. So one of my favourite expressions is, it's only ever our best idea until new information presents itself. Yep. So we need to do things early which give us that information, that data, so we can make some informed decisions on the run. So with that in mind, those get to know you type activities, those openers, we often call them in our space, they are not just time wasters. They're really critical information that helps us to understand the tone of the group, what their comfortability is, who our big personalities are, who may need a little bit of extra support to find their voice. Those things are incredibly powerful for us early, and it eases people in. And one of the other things I wanted to say about that is, and I've had this described to me about me, so this is not my words coming back, but they said, Mark, what we really like about your presentation is your disarming. And I really like that characterization, because you want to make people feel safe and secure in that environment. It made me feel really proud, because that's exactly what I want to create. As much as I've had a lot of experience in this space, and we could talk on for weeks on some of these topics, Fern, people still need to feel like they're part of the conversation and that they can do it as well. There's no point in going and saying, oh my God, that was amazing, I could never do that, because we failed as an instructor, we failed as a trainer. We need to disarm them so they feel like, yes, I want to try. I can start to take the risks that are necessary for me to thrive. If it's all too difficult or overwhelming, they're less likely to dip their toes into that training water, and therefore they're not going to get to the place performance-wise that they need to be. So again, coming back a roundabout way to the question there, I think it's those little things that you can do early that make people feel comfortable, and then you temper that throughout the rest of your training. And in our Train the Trainer bootcamp, we've got a phrase called CORE, which is the closers, openers, revisitors, and energizers. We believe that is the core of engagement. Yeah. So if you make sure that those things are happening throughout your day, not in that order, of course, you'd start with an opener, close with a closer, and then use energizers throughout the day to keep our audience in the game, and then revisitors to promote reinforcement. If you're doing that on a regular basis, it connects the content and helps them to connect to each other as well. They're the two most important things that we can do: connect to content, connect to other learners, and that makes the learning real.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think trainers, let's not deny, face many challenges. And that's from the minute they start prepping for the course, undertaking professional development to keep refreshing it and making it real, through to the course, and then facing the students. But I think for me, having been a trainer, is actually taking those challenges and turning them into opportunities, because you've got to remember you're taking the student on a journey with you, and your mood, the way you deliver, the way you prepare actually reflects on the experience that the student's going to come. So if you want the students to have a really good experience, well, then you need to turn that into a real positive. So that challenge that you have at the beginning really needs to, drive you for a better outcome, in my humble opinion.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And I think, our students are expecting a lot more from the course, from, their experiences, and certainly you want them. And it's business sense, right? Because the experience they have, they go out and tell others.
Absolutely.
That comes back to you in a roundabout way. From your perspective, what are some of the biggest challenges or the most difficult challenges that trainers can start to think about that they might experience in the classroom, to keep the learners engaged throughout the course? And just some hints, if you've got some hints that might assist them.
Yeah, so I think it depends on the audience. So thinking about some of the recent classes that I ran with some of our students, and depending on the age of the audience there. So if you're, say, working with apprentices, like at that younger space, their expectations, their experience, their behaviour is a little different than, say, those folks that are in the same industry but have been in it for 25, 30 years, and they're coming in. And there's pros and cons to both audiences. So understanding that before you're going in is important. And I guess the best tip I've got is to have a genuine toolkit of things. So I've got one that I travel around with. It's got a whole bunch of things. I'm not even sure when or if I'm going to use them, but I've got them available to me. So I've got my chimes, which I use to help bring the audience back. And for those who've never seen this, the idea is you say, you've got 3 minutes or 5 minutes for this task. When you hear the chimes, we'll come back and we'll share. The reason I use the chimes is typically as a trainer, we speak about 25% louder than we would normally, and that can be really straining on our voice. And then if we need to sort of shout above the humdrum of an audience to kind of bring them back to the main thing to do their debrief, then that strains our voice even more. So we can kind of cut through that, grab their attention without necessarily hurting the voice. Helps to protect the voice. That's something that sits in the box. I've got playing cards. I've got a range of other coloured index cards, which I don't know how I'm going to use it. Sometimes stickers and ultimately, I've got a list of different activities I can use those resources for. And, as I see the clock and go, I've got another 5 minutes here, I can use this as a debriefing activity. Or I might do this as an energizer where I get them up and get them moving around. So we've got the coloured cards and we say we're going to do an activity such as a stop, start, continue based on what we've talked about. And then they affix those cards to different posters I've pre-prepared around the room. But if you don't have that stuff with you, you can't all of a sudden run out to the stationery shop and get it. So if it's in the box, you've got it there available. I had an activity I ran recently, which I was almost on the spot, and it was called Caninology. Whole bunch of stickers around with dogs on them, right? Yeah. And I asked the audience to consider what are some of the qualities of the breed of dog that you're seeing on the sticker that you're selecting as a table, and how can we embody that as a trainer? And that was sort of an interesting one, and that was something that kind of came to me in the moment, but I had that in the box. And I wasn't sure how I was going to use it. How I've used that same one before is I asked them as an opening activity to grab their favourite animal or dog or sticker and they pop that on their name tent. And then I asked them at some other point to find someone else with the same sticker. So the same resource I've used in two very different ways. But the important thing is I had those things there. So the best advice I've got is to think about what do I have available to me? For me, places like Officeworks, they're my casino because there's no windows. I can be in there for hours, and I always leave with less money than I went in with. But go down there, grab a whole bunch of different things, add that into your box, and then just have some fun with it. Like I said,
Yeah.
that's the critical thing. And as long as you give good instructions, and the devil's in the debrief, as long as you bring it back to say, why did we do this? How does this link to our next topic? Then that's how you can start to build your own toolkit. There are hundreds of books in this topic, but I'm a big believer in creating your own things based on that audience. And then you yourself can have 101 games that trainers play that are around your personal style. I think that's really important.
Yeah. So really what you've described as preparation is key.
Absolutely.
So whether that's preparing for the audience, preparing for the course, because, I've also been put on the spot in courses that I've been handed the resources that morning to job seekers and just praying the whole time, please don't ask me anything hard.
That's
Please
it.
don't ask me anything hard. But, I think trainers, we're very resilient and we do adapt, but preparation is gold, and some of those hints and tips would be brilliant. And I think too, mental strategies such as I think when I did my cert for project management or leadership management, leadership, we were taught to forward pace any objections because you're going to go into a classroom where you have a range of students. So some will be at expert level, others will be beginners. And you have to adapt and deliver the content. And some of those experts know more than you.
Yeah.
So I think, just really forward pacing objections, use it as an opportunity to engage, interact, debrief, never go in there thinking, that you're going to, teach them something because that will bring you undone. But I think it is, and what you've described is actually putting joy back into your delivery because we deliver courses over and over and over again and they can become rote and just boring to us as trainers. So, and then it is a challenge. So I think just really putting some fun back in, and you've just described your edutainment philosophy, really. So thank you very much for that.
And we can be agile too with it, and some of these activities and some of these resources can certainly be quite used in quite different ways. Versatile was the word I was looking for. So again, an activity that we'll sometimes use is a human lineup. So we might do that as part of an opening activity, and we might do it as like an experience lineup from most experienced to least experienced. Visually, that gives me an idea of who my stars are in terms of the time on the tools or their background in that space, as well as those who might need a bit of extra support and coaching and whatnot. But then what I do with that is I'll say, okay, I want you to regroup, and I want at least 20 years experience on every table, or 25 years, or whatever the average is going to be. So what often happens is experience sticks together, usually at the back of the room, to be honest. So you have like 150 years of experience on one table and 6 on another. So you want to kind of mix that up. So that the same activity helps me to do that. Then we can go off and say, okay, I want you to do some interviewing of different people. So you might say, from people on this half here, I want you to interview the other half and ask them for their favourite tip from their industry. So now we're starting to share that wisdom, and we're acknowledging those stars in the room without necessarily having them have to jump up and say those things. So it's that same activity which gives us that data. Remember I said data was so important? Gives us that information, and then we can tweak and adjust and bespoke that journey for our learners.
Thank you for that. I hope everyone listening today really take these points on board because it certainly will put some fun back into your training, but give you some strategies to manage your different cohorts. So on that, respect and inclusivity in the classroom. So we've talked about, experience, less experience. We'll talk about personality types. So you've got some that are confident, less confident, some that shrink back, some that will just ride in on the coattail of others. What strategies, hints, tips would you have to manage that type of classroom?
So like a mixed audience?
A mixed classroom because, we've got all different personality types. Some will, they're the ones that have got the hands up and the answers to everything and the vocal. And then you've got others that could be based on previous experience, especially in first aid and those more, intense courses. They, might come with experience or some fears and they won't say anything or they'll sit back. How do we manage those?
So I think the important thing, Fern, is that we set the tone. And you're talking about respect, inclusivity. So
Yeah.
if we're not respecting, if we're not using that sort of language, and like I think I see a lot of trainers where they don't even realize the language that they're using is impacting people's participation. I was viewing a trainer once to give them some feedback. It wasn't in our organisation, but it was a part of the consulting we were doing. And he was a fantastic trainer, but every single one of his examples where it was a problem or an issue, it was always talking about a woman every single time. And I started noting it down. And every time it was a hero, it was a man. And like I didn't come down hard on him on that one. I said, "Did you realise?" You know, and I was making notes as we went through because it became really stark that oh wow, I wonder that if this is just a coincidence, but it was like every single time. And he was actually shocked. He didn't realise. So it wasn't something that he was consciously doing. And I said, "How do you think your female audience feels about that? Where they never see success in your eyes." And you're marginalising in that space. We see the same thing with culture too.
Culture.
So at the very beginning, if we don't set that inclusive space, then we're not going to get that even participation from the team. So the next strategy that I've got for you, Fern, is to create sort of structure, but in a fun way. So we can do that with a range of our activities. So if we've got, say, a dominating personality who wants to answer every question, who's always the team leader, there's a couple of things you can do. In our rooms, I have these leader cards, and they pull it out of the hat. So I said, okay, at your tables, this is our activity. The leader is, and we open up the card. It says, the person who woke up the earliest, or the person who's come the furthest distance, or the person with the most buttons on their clothes today. So then it changes things up, so you don't have the same person all the time. All you have to do is do that once, and then people understand what that activity is, and then they understand that they're not the team leader, and then somebody else has that role. I often usually start our boot camp, our trainer boot camp with, okay, I need you to come out with a team leader at your table, work that out. I'll give you 60 seconds to do it. And then give me a high sign. Where are my team leaders? Okay, great. Your first job of the day is to appoint a new team leader. Because normally what happens is the person who becomes team leader is that dominator or is seen as the most experienced person. So straight away we set that tone and give somebody else a different responsibility. Doesn't mean that they can't play later, but we make sure that there's that even participation. And once again, that's that preparation. I need to have the cards. I need to understand what's going to be a useful characteristic for that group. And that's one really simple way that we can achieve that. You got that even participation. That's a fun structure, if you like. Then the other side of things is around the timeframes that we give. So one of the biggest reforms that we had in our training is moving from traditionally when I was school teaching, I had like 5, 10, 15-minute type blocks of activities, and I went down to 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 90 seconds because it creates urgency. And people who would normally be quite verbose and talking too much start to be trained to be a little bit more succinct in how they communicate, and other folks get to have the voice. And what I found, Fern, which was really amazing, was the quality of the responses was no worse for 30, 60, 90 seconds versus 5, 10, 15 minutes. All I was doing was I was getting hours back at the end of the week. And I can always extend it. If I think it's a robust conversation after 60 seconds, hey, I'll give you another 60 seconds, but I'll be looking for 2 examples from each table at the end.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, we're starting to manage the ebb and flow of that audience. We're giving people an opportunity to participate, to have a voice, but it's in a really safe way. And if somebody feels really anxious and doesn't want to share for whatever reason, I can always say, okay, well, as team leader, you can always deputise somebody else at your table to share on this occasion. So we can still make people feel like they've got choice as opposed to this happening to them. That's one of my favourite expressions. We want it happening with them, not to them.
So really what you've described, these trainers have such a big responsibility and they're really behaviour managing their classroom. But I guess that is brilliant because it gets the best outcome from the student. The student goes away engaged more. So brilliant strategies. Thank you very much. So sometimes trainers are very concerned or worried about saying the wrong thing or getting inclusivity wrong or culturally. I know that they struggle with that, what's appropriate and not appropriate and politically correct and incorrect.
Yep.
What strategies could you give a trainer to manage that?
Tough question, because I think the the answer here for us as trainers is being prepared to grow. My 20-year-old self is very different than my 50-plus-year-old self. And, there's lessons that we have to make. As we asked the question there, I think of two examples. I'm not going to share the examples, but two examples of where maybe I said the wrong thing. And one of my character flaws, Fern, if I can be honest publicly today, is I've always been a bit of a jokester. And if I see an opportunity to make a joke, sometimes I don't know where the line is.
You'll take it.
And I'll take the opportunity, and I think that'll be tremendously hilarious. And then you say it, and you go, "Oh, that was not funny at all, and not appropriate." But it's said, it's out there, and I need to move on. Now I've grown. I don't have those sort of situations, certainly on the regular as I was as a young man or an early trainer. But I think growing from that and understanding that and understanding that, the way that I see the world is not the same way that other people see the world, and that's okay. But I need to create that respectful environment. And more importantly, if somebody else in the room is being disrespectful and making people feel uncomfortable, I need to move in. I need to do something. I need to escalate that because my inaction suggests it's okay. So if somebody is being sexist or racist or, again, doing a whole range of things that may not be appropriate, my inaction will basically validate that behaviour is appropriate and then make people feel even less supported in that space. But go back to the question there, what can we do is, first of all, be very aware of our own flaws and where our trigger points might be, and then work hard to minimise that kind of performance on our end. And then every moment's it's another learning moment, and go, okay, what could I have done differently in that scenario? How could I frame that differently? Why did I think that was okay? And then I think the other thing is watch other trainers and see how they manage that. That's the best PD that I get these days, is going and seeing other presenters and go, I really love how they frame that. We might be teaching exactly the same topic, but they did it in a really interesting way. Or how did they manage an objection from the audience? I really love how they frame that. How could I put that into my style? So continuing to feed yourself. I mean, as an RTO, we know that we have to regularly professionally develop, but it doesn't necessarily have to be in the mechanics of the job. I think those sorts of things, seeing what works, tweaking, making it our own, having our own natural style, but growing and learning from that. That's the best advice. So no specific strategies in this case. It's more about what can we take on board, and then sort of minimising risk mitigation, if you like, about perhaps putting our foot in it.
I agree with that. And do you believe student feedback, now whether you believe that's harsh, real, perceived, it is a student's perception and, what they expect from the course. As a trainer, do you feel that it's valuable that we take that feedback on and self-reflect and not just have an attitude, oh, well, that's how I do it, or, oh, no, that wasn't how it is, but take it on board, think about it, and as you said, reflect on it and be prepared to adjust, because if that's someone's experience, it's real to them.
I think the thing to consider there, and it's all about that data-driven situation, sometimes you had a bad day. And it's very explainable. Yeah, I wasn't my best self on that particular day. I'll take that on board, but I don't need to make any massive changes to my facilitation. I know that I was off.
Yeah.
As long as those days are few and far between, I think we're in good shape, rather than I'm going to change the entire session to kind of, feed that feedback. The other thing is that if you're getting one or two of those every time, that's a problem. One or two over the course of your year, that's that, difference of opinion. I see too many trainers, they might have a class with 20 students and they've got two people that give you less than positive feedback, and you focus on those two, forgetting that 90% thought that it was an amazing job, really learned from it, got something valuable from it, but then we're tweaking that experience for the two, that 10%. So I think that yes, feedback is important to take on board, needs to be in context. We need to be honest with ourselves about how that feedback came on. And almost every bit of feedback I've received that I would consider to be negative, I can see that for what it was. It was that experience, and what's the lesson in it for me. So I think of one many years ago where I probably got the worst feedback of my entire career. We had, this is back in the day where you had feedback given on a sheet, and it was a single sheeted piece of feedback form, and they used the second sheet and filled it all up. That's how much they really wanted me to have that critical feedback for me to work on my performance. And what had happened was I had a trainer who I was there to observe, and I felt like they weren't quite ready to continue. So I've jumped in, right? Because I wasn't going to throw them under the bus. I've just said, "Hey, I'm here and I can do this situation. I'm thrilled to be going through that." And what happened was that learner had really connected with the original trainer and felt like I was being overbearing and unprofessional to take over the class. And I was really just trying to save the feelings and the reputation of that other trainer. I don't know how I would have handled it differently. That's a really tough one because I can't go and say, "Hey, I'm going to jump in because I think your trainer's rubbish." I can't do that.
Yeah.
I can't do that. But I probably could have framed that differently and brought that trainer in to do the handover and have them introduce me and say, "Hey, we're really lucky to have Mark here today. He's an expert in this space and he's going to lead this next section." I think I would have been fine. So I don't think I did anything wrong facilitation wise, but it was all about the relationship, and that person felt like I betrayed that relationship, and therefore every little thing that they could find, they coloured it in terms of a negative experience.
Point you've just made there is, as a trainer, you develop relationships with your class. So that probably is the foundation for everything and the successful outcome, really, isn't it? If you think about it.
So, yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. So you've talked about realistic learning experiences, spoken about that and how they're relevant. So why do you think realism in your learning and your delivery is so important for a student?
I go back to that authenticity piece again, that real and relevant. It needs to be meaningful to their journey, their truth. And if it's not real or they feel like it's not for them, then they switch off.
Yeah.
You know, it's like that XYZ making widgets. Yeah, I get the point you're making, but how does that work in my industry? How does that work for me? Or that's not my truth. So therefore, I'm not going to connect with that at all, and therefore I'm less likely to transfer that to a real setting. So that reality situation is that people need to understand what's likely to happen. And I think one of the best ways we can do this in a practical sense is if we kind of show the learners, "Hey, this is the performance we're looking for in real time. Let's show you once. And then now I'm going to break it down into smaller pieces. We're going to practice that, but at least they can understand what the expectation is. And then if you add a few stories about this is the reason why I've done it this way, this is the thinking behind it. You might make a slightly different choice based on these parameters, but this is the reason why. Then they can say there's some choice to it. I'm not just doing it because the textbook said so. I'm not just doing it because the organisational policy said so. There's actually meaningful reasons for this. Not that organisational requirements aren't meaningful, but sometimes people just do it because we've always done it that way, and that doesn't always make it right or the most appropriate way to deal with a situation. So I think those types of things are super important. And I know we've got other questions about AI, and this might be a segue for you there. But in a world of AI, people are craving those human interactions again. They want to see that. I mean, I don't know if you're across LinkedIn that often, but gee whiz, the AI slop that's coming its way in that platform, that professional platform, whether it be marketing or blog posts or whatever the case might be, it's quite clearly not authentic. And I'm not saying we can't use AI to be an assistant, and I certainly do. I've jumped right in, and we'll talk about this a little later. But it's the assistant. It's not the manager. I still need to give the AI the feedback and have the supervision over it before I press publish. I still need to be involved in some of those decisions, whereas there's so much of it out there that's clearly not true. And then when you look at things like those deep fakes, like they're very close. And people go, "Wow, is that really you?" And not. So, we've had a few conversations today. We might have fumbled over a few words. You can be guaranteed that we're real. We're real. That's why we're doing it. We're doing it to be authentic. So that's part of it. And I think that will be a trend moving forward. People will continue to crave those human interactions and those real stories, as flawed as they are. They know that they're true. And they will gravitate to them. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, and I took away from ASQA's roadshows, webinars, and the conferences I've attended in the last 12 months. So ASQA absolutely embrace the use of AI. They're not going to stop it, but what they have said that there are risks and benefits to it, and you have to assess the risks, and certainly that human oversight and checking is the integral part. So I guess the message is embrace AI, let it assist you, but don't let it master you. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's not replacing us.
No.
It's like an AI assistant or even an AI partner. So a learning partner perhaps. And I do like using AI for a brainstorming partner, particularly with the voice mode on. So I use ChatGPT for that. And I'm in the car, on the way up in the car. And I was having just a back and forth about some of the other stuff that I'm doing. And what's cool about that is that I've loaded it up with all sorts of information about me.
Yeah.
It's on our private stuff, so that's not being used to train the model, but it's been used to train my own GPT. So it's got examples of all of my books, all of my articles, other podcasts that I've done. So it understands how I think, how I write, the way I craft a message, and then I can start to say, hey, I was thinking about doing this. Give me a few ideas. And it's now drawing upon how I would normally frame those things. I'm really pleased with that. And then it's a nice soundboard, which I think is useful. And I think our learners can get a lot out of that approach too, because some people find it difficult to articulate their thoughts in writing, but being able to bounce off that as a partner, a brainstorm partner, I think could be really meaningful.
So you're an example of using it efficiently, because I often admire you're traveling here, you're there, and how do you do what you do and keep up with it? So you've just given us the secret is that you're using it as an effective
and on the
tool.
run. On the run. So
the
I've
run.
really embraced the agentic approach there. So I'll jump on a plane and I'll say, okay, AI, this is your task. This is what I want you to be working on while I can't do anything else. And then by the time I get to my destination, I've got all of these reports, all of this information that I can then use to then do my part. I'm bringing my expertise into it. Or I might say, hey, I didn't give you enough parameters here. I want you to reframe that with this new information. Go away and do that. And that, like anything else, it becomes one of the team. And as long as I'm giving the right instructions, then I'm going to get closer to drilling down on what I need. If I'm very vague, I'm going to get vague responses. One of the things I often say in our webinars is, rubbish in, rubbish out. So if I'm treating it like Google and doing a basic one sentence search, I'm going to get a very broad response. I'm not going to get something that I can use that's specific to our context, our organization, our policies and procedures. But if I'm feeding it all that information, say, hey, based on our policy help me to understand whether this feedback is appropriate. If somebody's asked, can they do this? I don't know. Can we do that? What does the policy say? Yeah. Siri, what is it? Oh, I shouldn't do that with my phone around. What does the policy say on this one? Just to remind me, because you could have an extensive policy book. You don't know every word of it, and that could be a really useful way of using that. So it's pre-vetted, and then the information you're using is not necessarily going out to the wider internet. It's going to the sources that you've directed it to.
Yeah, and I think too that just brings in, and I'll only mention this once, compliance and quality and integrity of training. I think there's an expectation that you need to also keep up to date with what's happening in the sector, especially around ASQA, the quality, expectations and things like that, because when you do use the AI as your assistant, then you sort of already have an understanding of whether that's correct or incorrect, and you're double checking, you're not relying on it and then just sending it out to the world.
And you can't rely upon it. As I said, just like a human staff member who requires supervision or oversight was your word, and feedback, it's not going to get any better without those two things.
Yeah.
So I often refer to it like you're the editor in chief. They might be one of your, writing team in the pen, but in the end, you need to vet that information, check it, edit it before you publish.
The reputation sits with you and the credibility sits with you as the final checker, I guess. So where do you see the future of AI in learning and even assessing potentially moving forward in the sector?
Again, another interesting question, Ferne. I might break that as two different things.
Yeah.
I'll come to the assessment stuff second. But from a training perspective, I'm really excited about the future of how we can create a smorgasbord of choice for our learners. So things that we're doing right now that I think is making a huge difference is through the use of AI, we can truly bespoke our experiences for our learners, whether that be having images that look more like the audience in front of us, using case studies that match the industry that we're supporting, whether we're changing the framing of the text to meet the LLN requirements or the needs of that audience that's there, being able to translate potentially for an overseas audience or have them side by side. These things can be done rapidly and inexpensively versus what was available 24 months ago even. So that's already happening now, and what that means is we can spend less time doing that grunt work and more time with learners, and helping and coaching and supporting those. And then when we're not face to face with them, I think the other side of AI is helping them to use those AI assistants like a pseudo coach or buddy or something like that. Once again, loading it up, pre-training it with just the information and the guidance that you want, and then helping them to run through a series of scenarios or case studies or practical simulations where they're working with their buddy, their AI buddy, to solve those types of things, and then bouncing off. So I see that as a personal learning coach. Again, in a voice that they want to hear, all of these things truly personalized. So that excites me about this space. That I think is AI, a good use of AI.
Yeah.
So those sort of things, that's the future. In fact, there's a consulting work I'm doing in the US at the moment where there's an organisation they've got 8,000 staff. So it's a big staff, at least by our context, and they're looking at deploying these sort of daily coaching tips and so forth for their frontline staff. And is there an AI solution for that? So we're sort of working through the pros and cons and coming up with a platform that works for them. And it's been an exciting process too, because I'm kind of saying, well, how could we set this up, and what are the roadblocks to that? What are some of the objections to that, and how do we make it an authentic situation that's still playing the policies and procedures and legislation that's correct? But the early testing we've done has been amazing, and that stuff's available in pretty much all the existing large learning models, and then when you pay a bit extra to get the bespoke stuff there, then it's really cooking with gas to get the speed to get that information which is there. And what that gives is people choice. And just like I kind of like choosing a different GPS voice from time to time.
Yeah.
I had Snoop Dogg at one stage, or at least a version of Snoop Dogg, which is kind of fun. If you've never done that before, it's kind of fun. People engage with that, right? Just like they would if they said, I'm going to choose this kind of a voice for my assistant or my AI buddy. Then when they're engaging with that activity as part of their home play rather than homework, they're more likely to continue with it because they feel like a connection with that situation. So that's where I think the future is coming in the short term.
Yeah.
When it comes to assessment, I think there's some real challenges for our sector. And I know the regulator has provided some guidance in this space, but it's a difficult place, and we need to be more agile in how we respond to it, because folks are using AI a lot, and not critically thinking, and that's the issue. So part of the solution there, and some of it's better than others, but part of the solution there is reframing our assessment so that it's harder for that AI to just do the heavy lifting. And I've seen this in some organisations done quite effectively, where they go full circle and say, okay, I want you to use AI in answering this question. I want you to give me the prompt and the solution, and then your response is justify why that response is right or wrong. What makes that response correct? So now we've got the critical thinking element to it, and it's like you can't cheat there now. Well, I mean, of course you could, but it gets harder and harder to do so. Or one organisation I was working with, what they did is they had sort of a video that somebody would watch, and then they had to respond to what they were saying. So which strategies are the most effective, or what advice would you give to the person, say the nurse in this case, performing this task, to improve their practice. So yes, you could load up the video to AI. Yes, you could say, this is the rubric that we're looking for, but now it's taking forever. You might as well just do the assessment.
Yeah.
It's not impossible to cheat, but you're making it a little harder for people to do it. So I think they're the sorts of things that we will do as an industry to make it work. And of course, the other side of that is to move towards seeing it happen for real, which is not always easy in a world where we've got online training, but there may be some either, using camera work there, or the proctoring that we see in higher education. I personally don't want to go that way, but from a regulatory perspective, it's a way for us to have confidence that the person that is answering that question is actually answering the question and not getting that other stuff elsewhere.
So this is a loaded question and maybe a bit futuristic, but do you ever see AI taking the place or the role of a trainer in learning or providing or delivery or assessment in the future?
Well, it's happening now.
Is it?
It's happening now.
Okay.
There's schools, there's international schools right now where they're running basically tutorials with an AI avatar, special information type expert type situation. So it's happening now. It's here. The difference is the AI is only a reflection of the information you're putting in. So we still need expertise. This is one of the issues that some of the AI song developers are having there, where they've scraped the internet, all of human history, the music that they've trained the models on. Of course, the sounds fantastic, but if there was never music made, the AI couldn't recreate it. It's not creative in that way. It's only reflecting and using what it knows about other stuff. So we still need human interaction. And I think the difference for us is rather than replacing us, we become the curator of that content. And it's one of the many resources available. And that's, as I said before, what excites me, that smorgasbord of choice, where we can have more and more personalized learning opportunities, but someone needs to be the arbiter of what is appropriate. And that's where the changing role of the trainer will come. So it's almost like the lead trainer, and we're leading all of these other resources, but there's still a role for us as that subject matter expert. But we may not always be the person front and center delivering that as the technology becomes more and more advanced. But we still need to be the person putting in the script or checking that the information is valid and up to date. And that's how that role is.
So just a new look.
Just a new look and I think that creates a bit of excitement too, as you can continue to do this well after you thought you could, because you can continue to add your expertise and experience in a new way. So yeah, I think it's part of the future. I think it's part of the present. It's just the cost right now is a bit prohibitive, but that'll come down. So it won't surprise me that within the next few years we'll start to see more and more of that in the vet space. But the lesson there is that we still need someone controlling it, or more importantly, curating it.
Yeah, perfect. So you actually perfect segue, because looking ahead, where do you see vocational education and training in the next 5 to 10 years as a whole?
Yeah, it's a loaded question.
Yeah.
Agreed. We've seen such dramatic changes even in the last few years.
Yeah.
So I am disappointed in some of the things that have happened. If I can be completely frank, our international education space, I think, has been, through policies and post COVID, there's been conditions that have made things difficult. And then you load up, and we were talking about this before the podcast. You load up cost of living pressures, which create market conditions which are difficult for vet to be successful. Add things like funding and whatnot. So again, without being political around those types of things, it's important to understand this is the environment that we find ourselves. So, I think that the future here is we need to be more agile. We need to find cost savings, and AI is a solution to that in some ways. But in the end, for our sector to grow, we need to have more students. And one of the disappointing areas right now is we're seeing a continued decline in things like apprenticeships, and we've got massive skill shortages in this country. So unless that's arrested, then we've got an issue as a society, as an economy, being able to continue to drive the flow there. So I think that vet can continue to stay strong because there's going to be continued needs, particularly in Queensland as we move towards the Olympics coming up. It's only 5.5 years away from that,
Yeah.
and already they're saying they've got a shortage of 80 or 90,000 people potentially to get all the things that they need to get done. And who's training those folks? We've seen challenges in the building and construction industry for much the same thing. So if we don't have qualified people that right now been able to train people to do that stuff, and then be able to get the people out there to do the work, then things start to slow down. So I think there's certainly a need. And will continue to be a need for our sector. We just need to get that skills agenda right. Yeah. And I'm not convinced we currently have. That's as much as I could probably say at this stage.
Yeah, perfect. And that's great insight, because there are, identified skills shortages, and it is problematic. We're not got qualified trainers and assessors that are coming through the ranks. We've got an ageing demographic in trainers and assessors, and that wonderful, rich skills that sit there, they'll be retiring shortly, and who's coming up to fill that gap. So it is a certainly interesting space. So What does Mark's rest of the year look like?
Fern, I'm on the road a lot and I still love it. I mean, I thought that during COVID, that might be the end of my travel. I had 102 consecutive weeks at home.
Yeah.
It's a lot of time. Who's counting? I thought it might have been a challenge for my marriage, if I be completely honest too, but it wasn't, and we built a greater connection there. My wife so much would prefer that I was home full time, and I said, well, as long as I still love what I do and can continue to do that, I feel most comfortable out on the road, and I've been doing this most of my adult life. So I don't know another life. My kids don't know me another way. They're all adult children now too. So in the context of that, when I do love getting out and about, as I said, I spend 3.5 months of the year in Australia, and 6 or 7 months US is where I'm based these days, and then elsewhere. So I've got trips coming up to Africa. I'll be back in Ghana and Mali, which is in West Africa later in the year. I'll be back to Australia a couple of times as well for major conferences. We're running some boot camps with some folks. I do a lot of work with school teachers as well to get them that assessor skill set. So that's normally why I'm coming back to deliver those bespoke programs and then to create some good options for our international
And you've
clients.
got the VELG conference in October.
October.
You've just finished off a VELG webinar.
Correct, yesterday.
So for trainers that are looking for PT, jump on to any of those. Certainly, if you've enjoyed today's podcast, Mark is very interesting and has such a great range of topics. So, jump onto that. So from today's podcast and our conversation, if a trainer listening to today wanted to improve just one aspect of their training delivery or the way they engage with students, what would you say that the most important thing to think about?
So I'm going to go two important things, and we said that earlier in the podcast there. That first part is preparation. Like we need to, like, a lot of what we do looks effortless, and people often say, oh, you seem to be really good on the top on the cuff, but it's rehearsed. You've done this a lot of times, so people feel like it's fresh and new and it's just for them, but it's a version that they're getting on that particular day. So I think that's part of it. So that preparation is so critical, and even if you can't be 100% prepared because you don't always know what's going to be in front of you, you can make a few educated guesses. And like I said, have your toolkit there, a whole bunch of different things that you could potentially use as an engagement tool once you get a feel for who that audience is. And then to go side by side with that is fun. Like, I love what I do. And when it ceases to become fun, then I know that it's time for me to move on. But it can't just be fun for me. It is, but it also needs to be fun for my learners. Yeah. So that's the key thing there. It needs to represent their needs, their wants, their hopes, their dreams, their desires, and what their expectation is as a student. So delivering that bespoke, and I've used that phrase a number of times today, but really thinking about that experience rather than a cookie cutter approach. Yes, it might be the same content that I'm delivering, but how do I make it real and relevant to the audience in front of me today? So the phrase I used earlier was, it's only our best idea until new information presents itself. Let's use that information and create the best experience for our learners.
No, that's something I learned from you today as well, is that whilst we have many challenges when we're in front of a class, use those challenges to learn, grow, and just really sort of pivot, I guess, because that's what we do every day as a trainer. You're sort of pivoting and adjusting and learning. So, excellent. Thank you so very much. So if listeners remember just one thing from today's conversation, what would you hope it is?
Well, it's fun.
Fun.
You got to have fun.
Yeah.
So if you're not having fun, then they're not having fun. Like, it's a situation where if you're coming in and it's I remember the Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and you've got that teacher. If you remember that film, I know it's dating me a little bit now, but you've got that Bueller, that really dull, monotone voice. For me, that was my high school math teacher. Could not engage me at all just because of the tone of the voice. If you're coming in with that, bringing in all of your stuff and saying, I've had a bad day, so everybody has to have a bad day, then we're doing our learners a disservice. But if we can kind of create that levity in the room, like the topic can be serious, and we should never devalue the importance of a serious topic, but we don't always have to be serious about ourselves, and if we make a fluff, or we do something that perhaps is not exactly as we should have, we pivot, as you said. We move, we roll with the punches. They see that we're real and we're human. We can make make mistakes, but it's what we do in terms of how we correct those mistakes that will ultimately have them respecting what we do. If I'm making excuses for that, then they go, oh, this person's not taking ownership for something that might have happened. So having that fun, making them feel comfortable and safe and supported in that space, these are really simple things that we can all do, like regardless of the subject matter. So that will help them to lean into that, to the learning. So that's the group. I can't just give you one, but that's the group of things I think that are super important. But they're all linked to each other.
Yeah.
You get that fun right, everything else comes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Mark, it's been an absolute pleasure, as always, talking to you. And I've certainly learned a lot today. And thank you, everyone, for joining us, Voices in Vet. And we hope you enjoyed Mark's presentation. And we look forward to seeing you next time.
See you later, folks.